They never saw her. Gloria Bennett moved through the hallways of Cole Motors like a ghost. At 4 a.m., before the executives arrived, before the first shift clocked in, she was already there. Mop bucket rolling, shoes squeaking, gloves tugged tight. The air smelled of machine oil and cold steel. Engines sat on stands like silver hearts, ticking faintly as they cooled. Gloria paused, tilted her head. She heard things others didn't. The papery rattle of stress in a block. The faint whine of a bad bearing. She wrote it down in her notebook, the same battered one she'd been keeping for years. Her handwriting was neat, every page lined with small observations. Polymer cracks at 2,000 RPM, check heat shield tolerances, reinforce housing. But no one asked, no one cared, because to them she wasn't an engineer. She was just the janitor, and worse, she was a black woman in a company run almost entirely by white men. By the coffee machine, 2 engineers chuckled behind the partition. Old lady scribbles in that notebook like she's solving world hunger. Yeah, the other smirked. What does a black janitor know about engines? Gloria heard it. She always did, but she never flinched. She just shifted her bucket and kept working, mopping around their designer shoes. She remembered her grandmother's words from Mississippi. Child, sometimes you survive by being quiet, but don't you ever stop watching. She had watched her whole life. Watched men like Richard Cole, the CEO, climb ladders built on names and privilege while women like her scrubbed the steps. Cole Motors had once been untouchable. Cars rolling out of showrooms like polished trophies, commercials screaming about luxury and power. But the shine began to peel. Customers returned cars after months. Engines failed on highways. Lawsuits piled. Like bricks, local radio mocked the once great brand. Buy one for parts, and maybe you'll get 6 months out of the other. On the factory floor, workers whispered while forklifts beeped. Even they noticed the engines were failing. But in the boardroom, Richard Cole slammed folders and shouted, "Fix it, or I'll find people who can." Nobody had answers. Nobody wanted the truth. Gloria had written the truth in her notebook 2 years ago, but who was going to listen to a black woman pushing a mop? The day it happened, she was polishing the brass handles outside the boardroom. Voices rose inside, desperate, clipped, afraid. Through the crack in the door, she heard one exhausted engineer mutter, "Hell, maybe we should ask the janitor. She spends more time around these engines than we do." Laughter rippled. Bitter, nervous, Richard Cole's eyes narrowed. "Fine. Bring her in." The room went silent as Gloria stepped through, mop still in hand. She stood small beneath the fluorescent lights, her work jacket stained, notebook clutched to her chest. Richard leaned back in his chair, smirk sharp as a knife. "Well, Gloria, since my highly paid engineers can't fix my cars, what do you think is wrong with them?" Gloria's voice was low, steady. "The polymer bearings you switched to can't hold under heat. They're cracking early. You cut costs in the wrong place. Reinforce that, and your engines will last." For a second, silence. A few executives blinked, because they knew she was right. Richard's smirk twisted into a laugh. "I don't take advice from apes in aprons." The words dropped like poison. Executives flinched. A few shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. "Get out," Richard sneered, "and don't come back. You're fired." Gasps rippled. Gloria stood still, eyes locked on his, her dignity unshaken. She set the mop against the wall, tucked her notebook tight under her arm, and walked out. She didn't look back, but one man did. At the far end of the table, investor David Langston watched her leave. He didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He thought of his own father, a mechanic who died unseen after decades of being treated like nothing. And he thought, that woman just saved this company and they threw her out. That night, Gloria walked the empty streets, lunchbox under her arm, notebook pressed tight to her chest. Years of loyalty gone with one insult. At the factory gates, a voice called softly, Ms. Bennett. David Langston stepped into the cold air, coat draped over his arm. You weren't wrong in there, he said. Those engines are failing exactly the way you described. Gloria blinked, wary. Doesn't matter. They've already shown me the door. Maybe it matters more than you think, David said. My father was like you. He saw things nobody else saw, died with grease under his nails and no recognition. I won't let that happen again. He held out a card. Your notebook, your ideas. I'll fund you. Start your own line. Build it better. Gloria's hand trembled as she took it. Her grandmother's voice echoed, Don't you ever stop watching. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop only watching and start building. Months passed. A small workshop bloomed into a factory. Gloria poured herself into every detail. Sleeves rolled, hair tied back, pencil behind her ear. Her hands blackened with grease, her notebook pages filled with sketches. She didn't tower above her workers. She stood beside them. She listened, tested, adjusted. Gossip was different here. Boss knows her engines. She works harder than any of us. Never seen someone this sharp. Orders trickled, then roared. Her cars lasted longer, drove smoother, carried families further. Truckers swore by them, families trusted them. Gloria Bennett, the janitor, once mocked as nothing, had become the face of reliability. Meanwhile, Richard Cole's empire collapsed. Headlines screamed, Cole Motors files for bankruptcy, luxury brand in freefall. The arrogance that had mocked Gloria now left him alone, cornered. The bankruptcy chamber smelled of sweat and stale coffee. Richard Cole slumped at the table, suit wrinkled, tie hanging loose. Lawyers whispered numbers that bled red across their pages. The doors opened. Every head turned. Gloria Bennett stepped in, not with a mop, not in overalls, but in a tailored black suit, shoes polished sharp. At her side, David Langston. In her hand, she carried the same notebook. Richard's face drained of color. You, he whispered, disbelief cracking his voice. Gloria said nothing at first. She just opened the notebook, ran her fingers over the familiar lines, then set it on the table. Calm, deliberate. She signed the papers that transferred ownership. The room was silent. Then she stood, voice clear. Respect costs nothing. Arrogance costs you everything. The best ideas don't wear a title. They come from people you ignore. People you look down on. Remember that if you ever build again. Before she left, Gloria reached into the bag slung over her arm. Slowly, she pulled out her old mop handle, the same one Richard had mocked. She leaned it against the head of the boardroom table, against the CEO's chair. The room froze. The symbol was too perfect. What was once used to dismiss her was now the reminder of who truly owned the empiras. She turned and walked out, leaving silence in her wake. Gloria Bennett's story isn't just about one woman. It's about every black worker dismissed, mocked, and underestimated. It's about how racism blinds arrogance, and how justice comes when the overlooked rise. Because sometimes the quietest notebook holds the loudest truth. And sometimes the mop you use to erase footprints becomes the very symbol of power.